Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Have a Zevia I'm about to dive into. This is the Coca-Cola flavor, which is my least favorite, probably. My favorite's going to be the grapefruit. Anyways, I want to talk real quick on a certain topic that is relevant, I think, in the keto space, but beyond the keto space as well. Today's been a busy day this fall. We're packaging up all the keto bricks. Crystal's been up since 1 this morning. She couldn't sleep, so she's been printing labels. I've been working on stuff. I've been paying taxes. Whew, gotta pay my taxes today. Gotta love it. Anyways, I want to talk about actually a little bit of preface here. So I just finished, not just finished, but about a couple weeks ago, I finished a podcast, one of Joe Rogan's podcasts, and he had Stephen Guyenet and Gary Taubes on the line, and they were kind of having a debate regarding the topic of what makes us fat. Gary Taubes, who's pretty well known in the keto space, obviously is taking the side of insulin and the hormonal effect of insulin being the primary driver as to what causes obesity, whereas Stephen Guyenet takes the perspective more in line with traditional ways of thinking, of it being more brain derived, calories in, calories out, and basically like, you know, exercise, the whole energy expenditure equation, law of thermodynamics, so to speak. So I was listening to this podcast, and this was a longer podcast. I think it was like 2.5, almost 3 hours long. And the whole time they're saying much of the same thing, and they're not making a whole lot of headway. Both sides argue their point. Both sides have a good point. But at the end of the 2.5, 3 hour podcast, it was pretty clear that neither of them were really agreeing, and Joe Rogan was left at the end being like, all right, I don't think we made any headway, but great conversation. But it was interesting because the whole time I was listening to this podcast, it was very evident that both sides were just so gung-ho on what their, you know, theory, their hypothesis was, and they both had really good founding evidence as to why their side might be correct, but it was like they almost turned off to what the other side was saying. And this manifests itself pretty significantly in other areas as well, as it relates to how you build muscle, how you lose body fat, what makes you fat, what makes you hungry, all of this stuff, what causes cancer. Like, there's so many parallels and similarities in other avenues, not just obesity and what causes obesity. Let me get a sip here. So, I was listening to them discuss this topic, and like I said, both sides had valid points. Both sides had really good arguments. Neither side could come to agree upon anything, it seemed. And the whole time I'm listening, I'm like, well, that makes sense. That's true. I believe in that. And the other side would say something, I would also believe in that. There were some things that were said that I definitely did not believe in. Like, Gary Taubes, I felt kind of bad for. He was kind of cornered into agreeing with things on multiple occasions, and at one point he pretty much said that calories matter, but they don't really matter. That's definitely not the driving factor as to what causes obesity. And it was frustrating for me because they're both right. They both have valid points, and both theories hold weight, hold water, so to speak. Here's the thing, y'all. It all matters. There's no one-sided equation here. There's no way to point the finger, you know, solely at insulin and say insulin is the only reason people get fat. Just as there's no way we can solely point the finger at the brain and say, look, because you think you're always hungry and eat too much, that's why you're fat. As is true with the cancer, with the building muscle, with the losing body fat, with all of that we've already kind of mentioned, there are multiple factors, multiple variables, multiple things at play. You can't simply, you know, single out one variable and say this is the primary driver, this is the reason. And I think, especially within the keto space, the sooner we can all agree on that, the more headway will be made. There's just a huge debate right now going on as to if calories matter, if it's hormone related, if it's, you know, psychological, your relationship with food, your activity level, the environment you're in, but all of that matters. They all have an impact. I mean, you could waste years trying to decide which one is more heavily weighted, or you can just agree that they all have an impact and then focus on all as though they matter, because they all do matter. So this is kind of getting long-winded here, but don't become so fixated on what the insulin and hormonal levels you have are that you totally negate and don't focus on what your activity levels are or the amount of calories you're consuming. If you're overly consuming calories and everything else is fine, like if your hormones are solid, your insulin is solid, your blood glucose is stable, and everything else is fine, but you overconsume calories, that's going to have an effect. You know, it all has an effect. That I can speak to that. If I overconsume calories, like when I was eating 6,000 calories, I did start to gain body fat. Everything else was solid. Now they all have a symbiotic relationship. Like over-consuming calories is going to have an internal relationship and effect on my hormones, my testosterone, my insulin. It all matters. But view it like that. View it for the truth that it is, in that they all share some type of relationship. They all have an impact, and they all should be factored into the equation. Know that your environment plays a part. Your stress levels play a part. That has an effect on your cortisol, which is a hormone, your stress hormone. It all matters. Focus on them all. Know that there is no free lunch. You can't just have everything else stable and then eat ad nauseum and mainline foods that aren't really moving you closer to your goal. Calories have an effect. Your exercise and activity levels have an effect. Your epigenetics and genetics have an effect. But recognize that, and don't be daunted and just frustrated at the fact that it is such a huge pool of variables that it becomes almost like paralysis analysis. You can't move on them. You can't adjust. You can't tweak, and you can't fix them. Recognize instead that there's opportunity in so many different places for you to have an impact, because a manipulation in one can have a cascading positive effect on another. So rather than being daunted by how much you have to control, be excited about all the opportunities you have to control. And that is my stick on all of these things: hormones, calories, activity, exercise. Does it matter? Does it not? What causes obesity? What causes body recomposition? Hopefully you found this interesting. Now I'm going to get to packaging keto bricks. See you tomorrow.